I am 74 years old. For 7 minutes, my heart completely stopped inside a hospital room in Cleveland, Ohio. And in those 7 minutes, everything I had spent 50 years carefully building, the architecture of a life without God, collapsed in the presence of something so real, so immense, so utterly personal, that I have not been the same man since. I was not a believer. I want you to understand that from the very first word. I was an engineer, a man of load tolerances and stress calculations and things that could be tested until they failed. I built my entire adult life on the certainty that death is the end, clean, mechanical, final. And I am standing here before you today, an old man with a body that still carries the scar of that night, to tell you with the same precision I gave to everything else, I was wrong. Not slightly wrong, profoundly, irreversibly, and mercifully wrong. What I found in those 7 minutes was not darkness. It was not oblivion. It was a person, and that person knew my name. If something brought you here today, some quiet ache you haven't been able to name, some fear sitting in you like a stone, some grief that doesn't seem to have a bottom, I am asking you to stay with me. Not for my sake. I am an old man and I do not need an audience. Stay for your own sake, because what I am about to tell you was given to me to pass on, and I believe that if you are here, you may be one of the reasons I came back. When this reaches something in you, and I believe it will, let it. Stay close to this community. We are people who are trying to find our way home to the same light. Subscribe. Stay. Leave a word in the comments when you're done, because I read every one. We are in this together, and that together matters more than any of us know. My name is Richard Callahan. I grew up in Palmer, a working-class suburb east of Cleveland, in a house where Sunday mornings smelled like my mother's coffee cake and weekday evenings smelled like the mill on my father's hands when he came through the door. My mother was a Methodist woman, not loud about it, not preachy, the kind of faith that lived in small, reliable acts. A Bible verse on the refrigerator that actually meant something to her. Grace before meals, said without performance. The way she would touch the cross at her neck when something worried her. I was an altar boy until 15. I believed in the way children believe in things that are simply part of the furniture of their world. Then I went to Ohio State on an engineering scholarship, and within 2 semesters I had read enough Bertrand Russell, Sartre, enough scientific materialism to decide that faith was a beautiful lie that frightened people told themselves. I was not frightened, and I was proud of that. I walked out of my mother's church the Christmas of my sophomore year, and I did not go back. She cried quietly in the car. I remember thinking that her tears were the price of intellectual honesty, that living in clear-eyed truth was a greater kindness than living in warm fiction. I was 20 years old, and I was very certain about almost everything. I became a civil engineer. 40 years of bridges, drainage systems, water management infrastructure, the patient work of making things that hold under pressure. I married Patricia in 1978. She was Episcopalian, quiet about it, never a word of pressure in 39 years of marriage. We had our arrangement. She kept her faith, I kept my Sundays. We raised Thomas and Ellen in a house that was full of love, even if it was empty of any liturgy. I was good to them. I believed in being good. I just did not believe in anything beyond it. When Patricia died of cancer in 2017, quickly, in the brutal way it sometimes goes, in the spring when the crocuses were just coming up out of the frozen ground, something shifted in me that I had no name for. Not toward faith, nothing so legible as that. More like a silence opening up inside me that had always been there, but that I had kept filled with work and reasoning and the noise of certainty. I found myself sitting on the porch Sunday mornings with nothing in my hands, just sitting, listening to whatever the morning had to say. I told myself I was listening to nothing, but something in the marrow of me knew otherwise. By the winter of 2024, my cardiologist, Dr. Mehta, had developed a particular quality of professional gentleness that communicated everything the words weren't quite saying. 2 stents, 3 medications, a resting heart rate that made his face do something careful and controlled when he looked at the readout. I was 74 years old, and my body, the instrument I had used and neglected and taken entirely for granted, was declining in the way bodies do when the engineering has simply run its course. I was not afraid, I told myself. I had built things. My bridges were standing. If that was the whole of it, it was enough. The night it happened was in February, a particular Cleveland February that had gotten into the bones of the city and refused to leave. I had been feeling wrong all day, a heaviness in my chest I kept attributing to the cold air, to the dry apartment heat, to the kielbasa I'd had for lunch. I sat down in the green armchair by the radiator around 8 in the evening, Patricia's chair. I had never moved it, never been able to. And I thought about calling Thomas, and then I didn't. I just sat there. The television was on somewhere low, and I wasn't watching it. I was looking at the window, at the thin, precise lines of frost forming at the corners of the glass, the way nature builds structures without any engineer. The last thing I felt in that room was the weight of the chair holding me, the familiar creak of the wooden frame shifting slightly, the faint smell of radiator dust, the frost on the window doing what frost does in the quiet. And then a pressure in my chest, slow and enormous, like a fist closing, and the sounds of the room began to recede. Not violently, not with pain, but the way a tide withdraws, like something very old and very tired, finally releasing its grip. I did not fight it. That surprised me later. I had always assumed I would fight everything right up to the end. That was the kind of man I was. But there was a moment, just a suspended instant between the pressure and the dark, when I felt something I had not felt in 50 years and had no remaining category for, the sense of being held. Not by the chair, not by anything with dimensions. and then the room went dark. I was above it, above the room. I could see my body in the chair at its wrong angle, and I looked at it the way you look at a coat you recognize on a rack. That is mine. That is what I used. With no horror, no urgency, no attachment. The apartment was exactly as I knew it, but it was becoming less relevant. The way ashore becomes less important when you are already beyond the breakers and the sea has you. There was no tunnel, not in the way people describe. There was instead a dissolution, the walls growing less insistent, less solid, and through them, bleeding like light through very old paper, something that had no name in any language I had ever learned. I moved, or was moved, not through space, but through something beneath space, a fundamental change in what I was. And I want to tell you what left first, the cold. Not just the Cleveland cold, all contraction, every bracing, every held-tight thing I had carried in this body for 7 decades. Gone in a single moment, the way a fist opens. I was expanding. I was not afraid. The light came before anything else, and it came as warmth. And I want to be as careful with these words as I know how to be, because precision still matters to me, even now. It was not photons. It was not electromagnetic radiation of any frequency. It was personal. It moved toward me the way a person moves toward someone they have been waiting a long time to see, with intention, with recognition, with something I can only call gladness. The light knew me. I want you to sit with that sentence. I know how it sounds. I spent 50 years dismissing exactly this kind of language. I know the sound of self-deception, and this was not it. The light knew me. I heard my name, not with ears. I had no ears, but the way you hear your own heartbeat from the inside, always already present. Richard, not spoken in sound, spoken in knowing, spoken with a completeness of understanding that held my entire life within it. Every prayer my mother had ever prayed, every Sunday morning on the porch, every careful, deliberate, proud refusal, and not one syllable of it came as accusation. I want to stay here for a moment, because this is the sentence my mind returns to every night before I sleep. Not one syllable came as accusation. In 50 years of constructing my case against God, the one thing I had always quietly known was that if I was wrong, if any of this was real, then a man like me, a man who had openly denied it for half a century, who had called the faithful deluded in faculty lounges and over dinner tables, who had watched his wife pray year after year and felt nothing but a kind of distant anthropological interest, such a man would meet judgment. Cold, proportionate, logical judgment. It followed from the premises. That was the shape of justice as I understood it. He was in the light, or more accurately, he was the reason the light existed. He was present the way nothing human is ever entirely present. We are always slightly behind our own eyes, always partly elsewhere, always a fraction of our actual attention anywhere. He was entirely there, entirely toward me, and I knew him. Not from images, not from the Sunday school illustrations, or the paintings in the church I had left. This was the origin all of those things had been trying to point toward, the way a living face is the source of every photograph. He was more real than any real thing I had ever touched. He showed me my life, not as indictment, as illumination. He showed me my mother's prayers, and I saw them, each one, as a living presence, small points of light hovering over my life through every decade I had spent not noticing them. He showed me a student I had hired once, a young man that no one else would take a chance on, who went on to become an engineer himself, who designed a clean water system for a small town in Bolivia. I had forgotten him entirely. He had not forgotten him. He showed me Patricia, how she had loved me, and how I had loved her, back in the imperfect and real ways I was capable of, and how love, even incomplete and fumbling, and never spoken in the right words, leaves marks on the fabric of what is real that do not fade. He spoke, not in English, not in any language made of sounds, in meaning, direct and complete, the way the solution to a structural problem arrives sometimes not in steps, but all at once, whole. And what he said was this: you were never abandoned. There was no moment I was not there. I'm going to be honest with you about what happened to me when I received that. I, the man who had spent 50 years demanding empirical evidence for every claim, who had treated religious experience as neurological noise, I could not dispute it, because he showed me the evidence. Every inexplicable turn in my favor. Every morning I woke up that I shouldn't have. Every time something had shifted without a sufficient cause. I saw what each of those actually was. And I understood that I had been wrong, not just about the destination, but about the entire journey. There was a wholeness in that place that I have no engineering term for. Every question I had carried about meaning, about what we are, about what happens when the lights go out, not answered in the way information is transferred, but dissolved. The questions no longer applied. The way dream logic dissolves the instant you wake, and the waking world makes them unnecessary. The answer was right there, looking at me with total knowledge and total love. And for the first time in my life, I understood that those two things are not separate. In the place I was, they are the same single thing, the most fundamental fact of the universe. I did not want to come back. I want to be clear about what that means. I was not desperate or exhausted or finished with living. I mean that what existed there was so completely and genuinely more real, more alive, more good, more true than anything I had known in 74 years of embodied life, that returning felt like a narrowing, like stepping from a vast lit plane back into a very small, very dim room. I felt the pressure of redirection, firm, clear, like a hand on the shoulder turning you, and underneath it the understanding, there is something left to do. There are words you were careful not to speak for 50 years. Go. Spend whatever time remains speaking them. Coming back into the body was like being pushed through a door that was slightly too small for what I had become. Every nerve lit up with the shock of limit and cold and weight. The Cleveland hospital room arrived all at once. The fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, the voices, and I gasped. And I heard someone say, "He's back." And I tried to speak and couldn't. I lay there on the gurney and I wept. A young nurse took my hand. She asked if I was all right. I wanted to say, I am the most all right I have ever been in my entire life. I have just come back from the most real thing that exists. They kept me 3 days. Thomas drove in from Columbus that first night, and Ellen came from Pittsburgh the next morning. And they sat at the bedside the way children sit when something old and beloved has nearly broken. Relief and terror held together, not knowing which to feel more. I did not tell them right away. I lay in the night quiet of the ward, and I turned it over, testing it the way I had always tested things. Hypoxia, chemical cascade, the brain assembling narrative against extinction. I know those arguments. I constructed them myself. For decades, for every NDE account I ever dismissed at a dinner table. But I am an engineer. I know the difference between a structure that holds and one that will fail under load. What I encountered was not a failing structure. It was the load-bearing foundation beneath every structure that has ever stood. It was what the weight, in the end, rests on. I told Thomas first. He sat very still for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Dad, I think Mom always believed you'd get there." I had to turn toward the window because the truth of that was more than I could hold while looking at his face. It has been 14 months since that February night. I am still a man of precision, still careful with words, still skeptical of sentimentality, still the kind of person who wants to know what holds and what doesn't. And the evidence I carry now is internal, irreducible, and more solid than anything I ever poured concrete around. Jesus Christ is not a metaphor. He is not a coping mechanism for people who cannot face the dark. He is the most concrete reality I have ever encountered in a life devoted to concrete things. I spent 50 years calling the faithful foolish. I know now who was the fool. He sent me back to tell you, not in words. He doesn't use words the way we do. But the direction was unmistakable. The way a compass points north, not with argument, with certainty. If you have spent years keeping God at a careful distance, calling it reason, calling it intellectual honesty, calling it clarity, I know that architecture. I designed it, lived inside it for 50 years. And I want you to hear this from someone who built it and knows every load it cannot actually bear. It is not constructed on what you think it is. It is fear dressed as reason, pride dressed as clarity. And the moment I crossed over, every stone of it dissolved, the way frost on a window dissolves when the sun finally gets all the way through. You are loved, not as metaphor, not as comfort, as structural fact. I have been to the place where all facts originate, And that is the one holding everything else up. It was true before you knew it. It will be true after this body of mine finally gives out for good. And it is reaching toward you right now, in whatever room you are sitting in, whatever weight you are carrying, whatever you have believed or refused to believe until this moment. Stay with this community. We are finding our way home together. And there is more room there in that light than any of us, in our best and most generous imagining, can begin to hold.